Okay, so here's a new spring. Looks like that. So the key point is, don't release it from these things. If you release it, it will happen as with that one. It just goes all over the place and it's a big trouble. So the side of the spring is so that this thing can get into its hole right in here, so that will be this way down. Right, this way it would fit. So what we will do now is we will keep it as far down as possible while we're cutting away the wire. The idea of keeping it down is that it doesn't fly away, so it is secured with cable ties, but that's so that should hold. But yeah, keep it down. So there is the little spring here of the grounding that is standing in the way. So we'll just have to push it back. So now the screw, the spring and the shoe is in place, and we can get further. The spring is all in its bed. What one does in this situation is simply cut the first safety. So you see what it does. If it does that without being in the box, it can be a bloody experience. Trying to remove it with one hand. Even managed it. Still inside. Now is the turn of the other one. The wrong tool. Cut it. And it's cut. Okay, I managed to put the thing in. So the next step is to get back its lid. Once the lid is on, there is no risk for the spring to come out and hurt us. So here it is. Don't forget the grounding wire right here. It has to be screwed in, and all 4 screws. Now as all screws and the grounding wire are in place, one can put it back where it belongs. And here it is where it belongs, and adjust the spring to get into its slit. Now the spring is back into its slit, and it's time to fasten the box with its 3 screws, which is done from the other side. Now as it is fastened, all 3 screws, next step is to put some lubricant in this hole here. It should be grease of some sort. In this case I'm using some Loctite N500 nickel based anti-seize lubricant for the nuclear power generation industry. Any kind of grease that is not oily and basically flowing freely is good for the purpose. There we go. Have this in place, that's gotta be sufficient. We can put on its white lid. Now the next step is to mount back the spool with the cable. So now the essential thing is to remember where which cable goes. Right. It is nice to have a record of that if you don't want to resolder the things a couple of times because you've mixed up the cabling. So there it is. My record is some pictures, so I know that the black one was on the inside and the white one was on the outside. Now as the two wires are in place, one can also screw these two screws, not forgetting the grounding to be screwed together with this. One can actually first screw them and then solder these two. It doesn't really matter which order one will take. It's actually more comfortable to first screw and then solder, but it doesn't really matter. And still, mind the overheating. Don't overheat if you don't want to glue again here. Now the spool is attached, and what's left is to solder these two wires back in place. But before one does that, one needs to create some pre-tension in the spool, so that if one leaves it like that, it will simply stay, right? If it's free, once it is freed. So in order to make sure that it will come back in place once it is released, one wants to simply create a little bit pre-tension by winding about 4 or 5 revolutions. I'll give it one more. There we go. Now we can be sure that when we release it, it will come back in place. So next step will be soldering these two wires back in place. Now the wires are soldered back in place. If you wish, you can isolate them electrically. I personally can't be bothered to do that. So the next step is to tighten back this little screw in the hole so that this arm doesn't go left and right. That's not the best design one can dream of, because this screw hardly holds too much and actually doesn't hold almost anything, but it's better than nothing. So the shoulder is more or less staying in place. So as it is now, the last ever activity is to close the lock, screw it with its 2 screws on the bottom, and test it afterwards. So now the whole device is assembled back together, and it is a testing moment. I'll just ring all the connections to make sure there's continuity. So this one is working, this is the ground wire. Now we're testing for short circuits. No shortage. Going to the other one, the middle. It is ringing. There's no shortage with its neighbor. I've tested this one, but let's do it once again. There it is. And now the third one should ring with itself only. And it is ringing with itself. Nothing, nothing. There you go. And here's the set of tools I used to do the job. So this one is a small Phillips screwdriver, which is, yeah, hard to read. Just about this size. The rest is pretty self-explanatory.